Hi everyone, it's Johnny Seed here, and today I thought I'd have a look through some of my soundtrack albums on vinyl. So motion picture soundtracks and original scores, and I think there's one or two from some old TV programs as well. So there's quite a few, so I will crack on. First up, we have the film Dune, and this was music by Toto, and there's a track on here by Brian Eno, the Prophecy theme by Brian Eno, and Daniel Lanois and Roger Eno, who I'm guessing is a relation. Next up, the soundtrack to the film Firestarter. Unfortunately, nothing to do with Prodigy. This is music by Tangerine Dream. Not a brilliant film. It's a Stephen King adaptation and featuring a young Drew Barrymore, as most Drew Barrymore films are. And the soundtrack to The Spy Who Loved Me, the James Bond film featuring Roger Moore. This time, of course, has the song Nobody Does It Better by Carly Simon. Unfortunately, when I came to have a look through the records, I noticed the actual Spy Who Loved Me isn't in here anymore. Instead, we have the Morricone soundtrack, A Few Dollars More. So, where the cover is to that, I have no idea, and where the vinyl disc is to this, I have no idea either. I'm sure they will turn up eventually somewhere. Oh, and this was from a charity shop, and it was probably about 50 pence about 20 years ago. Okay, one of my favourite films when I was a teenager, back in the 80s, Weird Science. Okay, probably a bit of a much maligned film these days, but you know, so what? Who cares? Lots of bands on here that you've probably never heard of. Oingo Boingo, it's actually the band that Danny Elfman was in. We also have the Broken Homes, Chain or Cheyenne, Max Carl. Oh, Kim Wilde's on here. Wall of Voodoo, the Broken Homes, Taxi with 2 X's, the Wild Men of Wonga. I think that featured a comedian, a British comedy actor whose name I don't know in the minute, but I'll find out and put it on the screen. Lords of the New Church, and of course the best song on the whole thing is 80s by Killing Joke. It's also one of the best songs of the 80s, about the 80s. And I think this was from 1985, yes, so I was 14. And the soundtrack to West Side Story. This is the Leonard Bernstein, with lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, featuring Natalie Wood, Russ Bamer, Russ Tamblyn, and of course has the song America on here, which is probably one of the best pieces of music ever written, I think, in my opinion. And there's the reverse. Okay, another 80s classic, the Jim Henson film, The Dark Crystal. I've actually forgotten this film, I think. It's not one that you hear referenced very often. I'll try not to get the light in the shot. This was music composed by Trevor Jones. Okay, and When the Wind Blows, the anti-nuclear war animated feature. This one features Roger Waters, David Bowie, Hugh Cornwell, Genesis, and Paul Hardcastle. Oh, and Squeeze as well. Okay, the 80s reissue of the classic Fritz Lang film Metropolis, given the 80s treatment. This is the gatefold, and of course it has on here Freddie Mercury, Love Kills. Whoops, it was probably the big song from it. We also have Pat Benatar, John Anderson from Jethro Tull, Cycle V, Giorgio Moroder, Bonnie Tyler, Loverboy, Billy Squire, I'm not familiar with, Adam Ant, and of course Giorgio Moroder again. Right, next up, Blade Runner. The original motion picture soundtrack with music by Vangelis. However, this isn't Vangelis, or Vangelis. A bit of a scamola, I think, of these sort of soundtrack albums where you're thinking you're buying the music that featured in the film, but it's actually the music that has been played by an orchestra. And this is the New American Orchestra. So I think they must have replaced the old American Orchestra. So unfortunately not the soundtrack as you'd be aware of it. Alright, a TV programme here, British TV programme from the 80s, The Singing Detective. If you're not aware of this, I would urge you to go and check it out, it's very good. It's a bit dark, not really what you call a laugh a minute. The soundtrack itself features lots of very old bits of music from the 20s, 30s, 40s. So we have the Ink Spots, we've got Bing Crosby on here, we've got songs like Teddy Bear's Picnic, of course, We'll Meet Again. But yeah, very good TV programme. I would recommend people checking it out. Alright, straight from the 60s. This is the soundtrack to the film Easy Rider. Quite a duffed in copy, as you can see. It's had people writing all over it over the years. Featuring the music of Steppenwolf. We've got the Birds on here, the Holy Modal Rounders, Fraternity of Man. And of course Jimi Hendrix is on here, If 6 Was 9. The Electric Prunes and Roger McGuinn. Songs as performed in the motion picture. Okay, next up we have the soundtrack to the French film Diva. I must admit I've not actually seen the film. The soundtrack has got lots of bits of orchestral music on it. These tracks, Promenade Sentimentale, which is credited to V. Cosmo, is actually Eric Satie's, one of Eric Satie's Nociens, reworked, I guess you could say, or inspired by heavily. And also music from the opera La Wally, probably pronounced wrong, which is a fantastic piece of music. Just a bit of an unfortunate name, really, La Wally. But yeah, interesting listening, very, very good stuff. And if you can see on the front there, we have a classic HMV sticker from the 80s. Alright, one of my favourite films, Darkstar. If you've never heard of this film, I would strongly urge you to go out and look for it if you like lo-fi, sci-fi from the early 70s, very lo-fi. Music composed by John Carpenter, who also directed it. I think this is like a student film he did when he was studying at film school, which then got a lot of money chucked at it to make it into a real film. I love it. I love it to death. It's very, very funny. But I possibly find it funny because I found it funny when I first saw it when I was about 10. But I saw it again recently, and it still holds up. And of course, it features Dan O'Bannon, who was one of the originators of Alien. And a little bit of music. It's mainly the dialogue from the film, interspersed with some of the John Carpenter compositions. But yeah, fantastic stuff. And there's the reverse. Okay, Clockwork Orange, another one of my all-time favourite films. Unfortunately, this version of the album is in pretty bad shape, it's all coming apart. I mean, it's very old, this particular one. Lots of the music on here is by Wendy Carlos. She did the reimagining of some of the classical music on here, some of the Beethoven, etc. And of course, it contains Singing in the Rain and I Want to Marry a Lighthouse Keeper, which I'm pretty sure it includes. Yes. I Want to Marry a Lighthouse Keeper by Erika Egan. Even.